John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory,
Welcome
glory,
to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is a reading of the regimental history of the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry of the Mounted Lightning Brigade, written and compiled by B.F. McGee, Sergeant of Company I, Regimental Historian. Chapter 3. From July 7th to August 12th, 1862, Colonel Chris Miller commissioned to enlist the 72nd. Alex A. Rice made adjutant. Prizes offered for the first company to report. Competition and rapid enlistment. Camp Tippecanoe. Regiment full. First cooking. Marching orders. First march. On July 7th, 1862, Governor Morton issued a colonel's commission to Captain Chris Miller of Lafayette to recruit the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry in the 9th Congressional District to rendezvous at Lafayette. This brave officer was barely able to keep alive. So severe were his sufferings from a wound received in the 3-month service, July 11th, 1861, at the Battle of Rich Mountain, while leading Company A of the 10th Regiment. While his health was feeble, the fire of patriotism burned in his eye. The people had confidence in him, and soon began to flock to his standard. There were numerous applications for permits to recruit, and he issued from 3 to 4 for every company to be recruited. The camp to receive the recruits must be selected and put in order, and the recruits received and assigned to their places in camp as they came in. This would require a man of some military discipline and judgment. On the 7th of July, Governor Morton telegraphed General Joseph J. Reynolds of Lafayette to name a man for adjutant of Camp Tippecanoe, who should take charge of the camp and discharge the duties above named. General Reynolds named Alexander A. Rice of Attica. Mr. Rice was a young man of much promise, who had, at the beginning of the war, just completed a course of law study and been admitted to the bar. When Father Abraham called for 75,000 men in April 1861, Mr. Rice enlisted a company at and in the vicinity of Attica, and reported at Indianapolis about the 20th of April, with almost men enough for 2 companies. Like 20,000 others, they were too late to get into the 3-month service, but being determined to enter the service, he was assigned to the 15th Regiment. George D. Wagner, Colonel. Captain Rice was a man of more than many ordinary intelligence, but in matters military, his greenness was conspicuous and prominent. But with a worthy ambition to surmount every obstacle, he determined to make his company the first in morale and discipline in the regiment. And drawing lots for position, he got A, the first in the regiment. To make his company all he had determined it should be, he hired a drill master to drill himself and company, paying him $60 for his services. In a short time, there was not a man in Company A but knew more about tactics than the colonel commanding. It is no disparagement to Colonel Wagner's bravery, and the service he rendered in putting down the rebellion, to say that he never did understand the tactics, and it is no wonder he gave many ridiculous commands, all of which Captain Rice and his men would execute to the letter. As the command was often the reverse of what was intended, it soon caused difficulty in the regiment, and, as they were frequent, it may be proper to give a specimen command. Quote, "Head of column, to the right or left, as the case may be," unquote. In which case, of course, Company A would move straight forward, On one occasion, it climbed over a big stake and ridered fence, and moved right out into a field of corn. Of course, the colonel became furiously mad, while Company A insisted it was executing its last intelligent order. A row ensued, and they became of such frequent occurrence that Captain Rice's patience became exhausted, and he resigned, which of course militated against his military aspirations for all time to come. But about the 21st of July, he got his commission from Governor Morton as adjutant of Camp Tippecanoe, and immediately reported for duty. Here he had ample opportunity for testing his patience and energy. With the exception of perhaps of the 3 months' men, no regiment in the state enlisted more speedily than the 72nd. Camp Tippecanoe was opened in the latter part of July, and by the 11th of August 11 companies had reported. As but 10 could go in one regiment, the odd company was assigned to the 86th. The companies were lettered as they entered the camp. The first to enter was made A, the second B, and C. A few that came in at the same time drew lots for position. The camp was regularly laid out, and each company was assigned to the portion it held throughout the service. With patriotism pitched to the great emergency, Moses Fowler, a squire, of Lafayette, offered a prize of $500, and James P. Duggan, a squire of Delphi, a prize of $200, to the first company that should go into camp at Lafayette in answer to this call. The patriotic liberality of these gentlemen is an index to the spirit and conduct of men of means throughout the state in seconding the efforts of Governor Morton to promptly fill Indiana's quotas without a draft. The contest of various companies enlisting to obtain these prizes were stirring, and greatly facilitated the enlistment of the 72nd. Company A secured these prizes, being rapidly recruited in Carroll County by Nathaniel Herron, Louis Gross, James H. Barnes, and others, organized at Delphi, and brought into Camp Tippecanoe on or about the 28th of July, before any other company. At the organization, Nathaniel Herron was elected captain, Milton Newton, first lieutenant, A.J. Klepser, second lieutenant. We have not exact dates when each of the companies entered Camp Tippecanoe, but know that all were in camp by the evening of August 9th, and those that had not previously organized held elections on the 10th. Company B was enlisted at Crawfordsville, Montgomery County, by Henry M. Carr, Oliver P. Mahan, and Wesley C. Gerald. At its organization, Henry M. Carr was elected captain, Oliver P. Mahan, first lieutenant, Wesley C. Gerard, second lieutenant. This company entered camp on the afternoon of the same day Company A entered. It was a close race between them in the contest for position and prize. Company C was enlisted at Lafayette, Tippecanoe County, by James E. Robinson, Frank B. Everett, George Geiger, Daniel W. Moore, George Ruger, John Glaze, William Thyme, and others. It organized by electing James E. Robinson, captain, Frank B. Everett, first lieutenant, George Ruger, second lieutenant. The company went into camp July 29th. Company D was enlisted at Thorntown, Boone County, by Robert H. La Follette, Chester G. Thompson, Robert M. Sims, Lewis B. Garrett, and others. It was organized by electing Robert H. La Follette captain, Chester G. Thompson, first lieutenant, David H. Ashman, second lieutenant. Company E was enlisted at Linden and Ladoga, Montgomery County, and Sugar Grove, Tippecanoe County, by Dr. J. B. Johnson, Lawson S. Kilbourne, Harvey B. Wilson, and others. At its first election, Dr. John B. Johnson was elected captain, but never mustered as such, being commissioned and mustered as first assistant surgeon. The commissioned officers mustered in with the company were Harvard B. Wilson, captain, Lawson S. Kilbourne, 1st Lieutenant. William H. Mahan, 2nd Lieutenant. Company F was enlisted by the commissioned officers and others at Williamsport, Warren County. It organized by the election of Moses Birch Captain. James L. Dalton, 1st Lieutenant. Orrin E. Harper, 2nd Lieutenant. Company G was enlisted at Dayton Clark's Hill, Stockwell and Culver's Station, Tippecanoe County, by Samuel C. Kirkpatrick, Adam Pinkerton, John B. Crick, William R. Jewell, and others. At its first election, Samuel C. Kirkpatrick was elected captain, but was commissioned and mustered as a major. The officers mustered with the company were Adam Pinkerton, captain, John B. Crick, 1st Lieutenant, William R. Jewell, 2nd Lieutenant. Company H was enlisted at and in the vicinity of Attica, by Jazz M. Stafford, Augustus Zerse, and others. It organized by electing Robert B. Hanna, captain, Dr. William C. Cole, 1st Lieutenant, who was commissioned and mustered in as 2nd Assistant Surgeon. James M. Stafford was mustered in as 1st Lieutenant, and George F. Ward as 2nd Lieutenant. Company I was enlisted at Pine Village, and Milford, Warren County, and Montgomery, and Montmorency, Tippecanoe County, by Jesse Hill, Robert A. Vance, George J. Foster, and others. It was organized by the election of Jesse Hill, captain, Ira Brown, 1st Lieutenant, John Watts, 2nd Lieutenant. Company K was enlisted at Frankfort, Clinton County, by the officers who were elected at the organization of the company, viz. Hiram B. Collins, captain, George W. Ross, 1st Lieutenant, James H. Whitcomb, 2nd Lieutenant. In Camp Tippecanoe. Here we are in Camp Tippecanoe. It would be a mild expression to say there was confusion. At times almost a mob. Not violent, but noisy. Very few knew anything of what might be required of them as soldiers. And, while all were willing and anxious to learn, there were few to teach. While Colonel Chris Miller was nominally commandant of the post, his feeble health allowed him to be there very seldom. And the work of laying off the camp, assigning companies to their campgrounds, procuring cooking utensils, provisions, blankets, etc., devolved upon Adjutant Rice. Everybody wanted something, and wanted it just now. In all this confusion, Adjutant Rice was cool. If he answered one question, he answered thousands, and many questions he answered 1,000 times. His patient good nature and determination soon brought order out of confusion, and in less than 2 days he had every soldier provided with everything that could possibly be procured for duty and comfort. The camp established under guard by day and night, quarters policed, and all moving under a regular discipline as if the regiment had been in service months instead of hours. Adjutant Rice was now reaping the benefit of the $60 he paid the drill master in the spring of '61. An incident is here to the point that Adjutant had a brother in Company F, Captain Birch commanding. On the second morning, after all the companies reported, while Adjutant Rice was mounting guard and giving them their instructions, Captain Birch, who was standing near, all attention and admiring the ease with which the instructions were given, turned to the adjutant's brother and asked, "What military school did your brother attend?" The members of the regiment, from expectant officers to many non-expectant privates, had provided themselves with copies of the tactics, or procured them as soon as possible, and began the hard study of them immediately at every spare moment of time. But there was little time in this camp. Friends were going and coming, and all was humming with those preliminary transition details inevitable when citizens suddenly become soldiers. There was some effort at drill by a few of the companies, but little could be accomplished in that line. On the night of the 9th of August, Governor Morton made a speech in the public square Lafayette. The members of the 72nd were invited to attend in a body, which they did. It was one of the governor's grandest efforts, and was greeted by a round after round of applause. His grand spirit penetrated, cheered, and strengthened everyone who heard him. To the men just entered into camp, having left the peace of home and their dear ones for the strife of war, it was medicine to the bones. And all marched back to camp with calmer and more reconciled hearts. On the evening of Monday the 11th, orders were given to be ready to move at 6 the next morning, and our hopes that we might remain in this camp for some time were nipped. The camp was situated on a beautiful hill south of the city, and as other regiments organized here had been permitted to remain for some weeks or months to drill and get ready for the field, we had indulged a hope that such might be our fortune. Besides the desire to be near our families and friends, and to secure sufficient drill to feel safe in the enemy's country, most of the men had left their business in a very unsettled condition. Farmers had left their wheat unthreshed, and no arrangement for the care of their farms. Some merchants had turned the key in the doors of their stores, and made no arrangements about selling their stocks or employing clerks. Doctors had left their practice, and some patients at death's door whom they had hoped to visit again. Mechanics had locked up tools in shops and were anxious to make some arrangements by which tools in shops could be sold, or the business carried on by someone else. As in the days of the Revolution, men left plows standing in mid-furrow to join the patriot forces, so had men dropped their business in the middle of the furrow to answer this call, which came when the army was in great straits, and when the Union was trembling in the balance. This camp will be remembered by almost all the original members of the regiment the longest day they live, as being the place where they made their first attempt at camp life, brought up in a land of peace and plenty, with mothers, sisters, and wives, as good as the world affords. Few of them had ever undertaken to provide a meal's victuals for themselves, and had they undertaken it at their own homes, would not only have failed, but amused the women folks almost to death. But here in camp, where the materials for a square meal were neither varied nor abundant, and the means for preparing it neither convenient nor extensive, their failures were ludicrous and laughable in the extreme. 1,000 incidents of these first attempts might be written, and the 1,000 failures, with the most utter chagrin and mortification, would make an amusing and often sad chapter in the history of the 72nd. Just imagine, reader, that you see a mess of farmers, whose wives could make a cup of coffee fit for the gods to sip, and dress it with pure white sugar and golden cream, so that its richness excelled the purest Rhenish wine. And to such delicious coffee their palates have been educated from youth up. Now the mess sit upon the ground, their legs coiled up before them, and in their midst lies their first spread of hardtack, sow belly, and their own make of coffee. Of course they can't attack the sow belly and hardtack without a sip of coffee as an appetizer. They pour the coffee, which runs out the grounds first, daub some commissary sugar into it, and say, as they stir, "How I do wish I had some cream." Then see them as they taste, working their mouths, licking out their tongues, and each acting just like a young colt at weaning time when he lays hold to suck as usual, and finds the udder soaped from end to end. If there ever is a time when a great big man feels his utter helplessness, it is when he begins to cook for himself in the army. He wants to jam both fists into his eyes, howl like a booby, and say, "I want to go home." Of course, we always said on such an occasion, "The smoke hurts my eyes." No raw soldier should attempt to cook a goose. It requires great skill, attained only by frequent practice, on different geese to cook a goose well. On their way to camp from Pine Village, in wagons, a squad of Company I, called Pinevillians, caught a lot of geese at the farm of Judge Rowe, of the West Side, and brought them into camp. Because it was Sunday, the 10th of August, and so great was their hurry that they left home without rations. Under no other circumstance would they have taken the geese in a northern state. When they got to camp, they found plenty of bread but little meat, and being ravenously hungry, they proceeded to skin and try to cook their geese. From 3 p.m. to almost sundown, they boiled the pot like fury, until it sung and danced upon the fire. But the longer they boiled, the tougher the geese got. As the sun sank in the west, their hunger became unbearable. They tore the geese from the pot, rent them asunder, seized a piece of bread in one hand and a hunk of goose in the other, and began to eat. But horror, what faces! And to this day, if you want to ruffle the calmness of the stomach of a Company I man, ask him how he relished his first gander supper at Camp Tippecanoe. Yet with such a discouraging beginning, the men of the 72nd could cook any rebel's goose neatly inside of 6 months from enlistment. The night of the 11th, after receiving marching orders, was one of much excitement and little sleep. The word flashed out by telegraph and sped by couriers to the friends of the regiment, and long before daylight, wives, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and sweethearts began to arrive, and by sunup numbers of them were in camp, bringing such articles as they thought we might need, and to bid us good-bye. The occasion is a sad one to call to mind. There were so many mothers with babes on their bosoms, and little children clinging to their skirts, for, as before said, the fathers went in this call. In spite of their brave efforts, many could not refrain from sobs. Some ladies and gentlemen who had come out from Dayton to see us off sang the following song a little while before we took the cars. Heavily falls the rain, wild are the breezes tonight, but 'neath the room the hours as they fly are happy and calm and bright. Gathering around our fireside, though it may be summertime, we sit and talk of brothers abroad, forgetting the midnight chime. Brave boys are they, gone at their country's call, and yet we cannot forget that many brave boys must fall. Under the homestead roof, nestled so cozy and warm, while soldiers sleep with little or naught to shelter them from the storm. Resting on grassy couches, pillowed on hillocks damp, of martial fare how little we know till brothers are in the camp. Brave boys are they. Thinking no less of them, loving our country more, we sent them forth to fight for their flag their fathers had borne before. Though the great teardrop started, this was our parting trust. God bless you, boys, we'll welcome you home when the rebels are in the dust. Brave boys are they. May the bright wings of love guard them whenever they roam. The time has come when brothers must fight, and sisters must pray at home. Oh, the dread field of battle, soon to be strewn with graves. If brothers fall, then bury them where our banner in triumph waves. Brave boys are they. While this was a patriotic song, it was not the most cheerful that could have been sung at that hour of excitement, when the fountains of every heart were ready to break through its wounds. Before the verses were half finished, many of the listeners and singers were in tears. It was too true, too vivid a prophecy of the fate that awaited many. We hasten to a more cheerful subject, if that, to us, remarkable day affords any. this being our first, and in one respect, the most important march we ever made. It is strange that among the voluminous material for this history furnished by comrades, not one of them says a word concerning it, as if there was something about it the comrades would gladly forget. As most of the companies had in excess of from 3 to 20 men, there were in camp on the morning of the 12th 1,200 men. With the excitement above named, getting breakfast, taking down tents, packing up for the first time, there was a storm of wild confusion reaching up to 10 a.m. There was ample time, and with the means at hand, old soldiers would have enjoyed a good hearty breakfast. But with the novelty of the situation and incident excitement, it is doubtful whether a single man got half enough to eat. By the time the sun was an hour high, an effort was made to get this massive confusion into line preparatory to moving off for the war. As we had not yet a single regimental officer, and our captains and lieutenants were as green as the greenest, the scene can be better imagined than described. Specimen commands of officers on that memorable occasion are here given, as they may be useful to rising generations. Get in 2 lines, one behind the other. Fall in here, boys, in 2 rows, like injuns. Come up sideways, with your faces in this direction. Get in 2 ranks. Step over sideways, and march backwards 4 feet. Now march in a string. Come around to the left like a barn door. By a sort of mutual understanding of each other, the officers and men, assisted by the adjutant, got into a pretty fair line of 3 to 5 deep, as we were not to receive a charge from the enemy. We cared less for its military exactness than for its rugged outline. It looked as ragged and grand as a mountain range. We marched forward, promptly at the command, but as we had no music, each took his own step, and at every slight turn in the line of march, we telescoped into each other liberally. And when the leading company was halted, it was almost blotted out by the others rushing pell-mell down the hill and piling onto it. We were wine to the war, and didn't stop for trifles. We were unentangled at the foot of 3rd Street about 9 a.m., and told that the cars would soon be along. Then we began to kiss our wives, sisters, sweethearts, and other women, in a great hurry, as we supposed the cars would be along before the last sweet but sad duty could be deliberately performed. However, the cars delayed their coming. The kissing was ended. The sun was boiling hot, and we simpletons stood in it while there was an abundance of shade close by. Some of the newly elected officers became suddenly inspired, perhaps by the presence of the ladies or his satanic majesty, with the importance of their offices, and kept us standing there by the side of the railroad track in the hot sun, and would keep marching up and down the line, commanding us to stand up straight and keep in our place, for they said, "The cars will be along in 2 minutes, and you may be left." We cannot now help thinking how natural it would have been for an old soldier to have deliberately walked to the shade, spread out his blanket, laid down and gone to sleep. But there we stood, like blockheads, until after 12 p.m., when we heard the calls whistle, and once more began to kiss the women and babies farewell. But before we got fairly through, the cars came, and we all got on with the greatest haste for fear we would be left. It was an hour before the train started. Every effort was made by the departing soldiers to keep up a cheerful exterior, and those who stood near the cars, waiting to see us off, reciprocated the effort. Reader, may you never know what an ordeal we passed through at that train. A mother with her babe on her bosom and her 3 little ones hanging to their skirts stood near the car. When the little ones stretched out their hands, some sang, "Papa, Papa, turn back, and another began piteously to plead, Papa, take me with you." The poor mother's heart could bear no more, and she wept bitterly. The father sobbed like a child. It was contagious, and not only wives and mothers wept, but many a stout frame shook with emotion. As the cars rolled slowly away, both those going and those staying looked at each other with tearful eyes as they waved adieu. Those were the days that tried the souls of men and women. What was suffered that day, thousands of others suffered during the war. Chapter 4. We will begin next week. Let's hop into some show notes. This is a rather emotional episode, so this is so far one of the best opening histories to anything we have read. It's hilarious at times. I had to stop myself from laughing or to take a moment and wipe away the tears, so let's get into it. First off, I found the concept of prizes for the first company to show up very entertaining. I'm sure when that was paid out, the money was well spent. But to come up and be in second place, now you're in Company B. Second place for the whole war. Oh, man. I'm sure they loved it being in Company B. It had a lot of pride, but I bet it got rubbed in once or twice. Now, the mentioning of Captain Rice and his greenness and hiring the drill master, and then purposely ignoring their commanding officer giving wrong commands. Oh my goodness. I think I wrote down head of column to the right or left, as the case may be. Is probably one of my favorite commands I've ever heard. All sorts of silliness, absolutely delicious to read about. I love it. And in Camp Tippecanoe, oh boy, I'm really excited about this part. These early war camps were really something else, and they're in the heart of cities. And they're filled with all of these soldiers with no training. So I went and I looked up Camp Tippecanoe to see if it still existed or if it had become a park or something like that some have done. The location used to have a sign up, but it is marked online. So if you want to take a look at the location in which they're talking about and get an idea of this, the address is 1302 South 4th Street, Lafayette, Indiana. You can see the really nice bluff that they're up on. It's all houses now, of course, but and I'm really glad for Google Maps for this because it kind of really shows us the location that they were at in and kind of having to go downhill, go into the town, and you can take the train car out of there. So now, something else I wanted to talk about. We are told that the men of this regiment leave their farms, merchants left their stores and all their goods, doctors left their patients, that these men responded to Abraham Lincoln's call so quickly and in such a hurry. This is true American patriotism at its brightest here, responding to the call of the nation to protect it. And this is happening all over the country, so no wonder they tell us about the men in this enlistment era being a special breed of soldier. And to quote, he wrote, "When the Union was trembling in the balance, to sign up for that is incredible." It made me shiver reading it. Now, let's get on to one of the best parts I think I have ever read, was the men cooking for themselves for the first time. My fellow mush eaters, I will tell you what, I am thankful that I can look up recipes on the internet because if I had born in their time, I would have ended up just like them. Modern day troops get MREs and the chow hall, but the creative ways that experienced troops, even with just those, can cook will never cease to surprise me as I saw it firsthand. In fact, for my listeners, if you were in the armed forces, why don't you email me your favorite way to eat a ration or a meal? It doesn't even have to be a favorite. Maybe it was just something that was unique and creative. Anything that you can think of while you were in the military, or if you worked or lived somewhere where you needed to get creative with your food, you were out in the wilderness or you were logging or, whatever it might be. I want to hear about it. I'll put them together in a little episode and release it. So email me at warofrebellion@gmail.com. That's warofrebellion@gmail.com. And we'll see what we get. I'll piece them together to maybe like a 10-minute episode or something, depending on how many I get. And then I'll just release it as a fun little thing to talk about, with our listeners. Now, this quote I wrote down: wives who could make a cup of coffee fit for the gods to sip. What a quote. And certainly high praise for their spouses. And of course, the description of them trying to drink coffee for the first time and doing it wrong is very funny. I was grinning like mad because I've seen that firsthand myself. Just absolutely amazing. And soldiers wanting to cry like toddlers and saying it was the smoke hurting their eyes. I've been there. Now, I think the best paragraph title I have ever read was "No soldier should ever have to cook a goose." Boiled goose is so gross, and their description of it is hilarious and great. And this kind of leads into the families arriving as the soldiers are getting ready to leave. I'm sure there was, cakes and food and snacks that were handed to the soldiers. But the mothers and the children and the wives and girlfriends seeing them off, leaving for the war, leaving for any war is always really hard, especially so during this time period. I think we forget that all of these men, they've seen the newspaper printing casualty reports. The wounded are flooding back into the towns and cities, and great armies are doing battle. So these families and these men know what's going to go happen to them. And so I just want to make a little quick reminder. If your dad or your mother are still around, or you still have some family, I would call them. Because that's what I did when I was reading this. I called my dad and I was like, I miss you. It goes by quick, So, all right, let's talk about this song that they sang while the boys were waiting to leave. What were they thinking? Who sings a song about dying and think that's a good idea? My goodness, it starts off pretty good and then goes off the rails. Like, hey, boys, you're all going to die. Have fun. Oh, and that everyone was crying before the song was even half done. It was just, these poor soldiers. And that none of them really wrote anything down about this day when they were leaving kind of says a lot. Maybe they were a little busy thinking about other stuff and didn't want to, if your bag is packed really full, I understand why you wouldn't want to whip out your journal and write about it. So, some other things I found interesting: the soldiers going down the hill, and then they halted at the bottom, and the rest of the regiment was running pell-mell down and slammed into them. I hope everyone could picture that as well as I did. It was very funny. And of course, the last train scene here, where they're all standing in line waiting for train cars that haven't come yet, and they're just having to stand there in the boiling sun, is just too true. And that they would go and try and get some sleep as old soldiers later on is also true. It just, some things never change. For us, it was always Motor T. They'll be along at any moment, and then, 2 hours go by. And that's a good time to get some sleep. So, all right. When they're on the train and it takes an hour for it to leave and they just have to sit there and their families have to stand there, when he started talking about the mother with her 3 kids standing by the train car and the kid says, "Papa, turn back or take me with you." Oh, and the whole family is sobbing and it spreads through the regiment of everyone crying. I'm not sure if you guys could tell, but at that section, my voice started to break because it started to get to me. It just, in a very emotional experience that I have had before, and also I'm sure many of others have had before, but I could see it in my head. I know what that feels like. Oh, oof, really got to me. So with that, that's all of my notes. I'm going to go ahead and quickly apologize to you guys. I know it's been a really long time since the last episode, about 4 weeks. I just want to let you know that I'm still alive, first of all, but I'm making sure that all of my grades, and I'm taking a lot of credits and classes this year, and so, or this quarter, I should say. But it's a lot of work, and I want to make sure that my grades stay where I want them to be because I'm trying to get into a 4-year university here, and I'm working really hard because I've got 4 classes. 4 college classes is a lot, and of course I took very hard classes that require an immense amount of studying, so now that things have settled down and I've got A's in all of my classes right now, I'll probably start going back to the weekly episodes because I'm just doing a little bit each day, kind of like tucking in at the end of my homework there. So, all right, folks, I've got something cooking up for you pretty soon that's about to come out. And that's it. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. It will be out next week, I promise. So with that, my friends, thank you for listening. I will catch you in the next episode, and stay safe, and I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on.